Welcome to Speak from the Body, a podcast that seeks to explore the wealth of wisdom of the body. My name is Avni Trivedi, and I'm your host, as well as an osteopath, doula, and movement teacher. In this podcast, I speak to experts about all sorts of topics to do with the body, such as touch, trauma, body confidence, gratitude, birth, movement, relaxation, and baby development. My wish is that you learn how to connect with, listen to, and respect your body. Susanna Howard is the founder and artistic director of Living Words. Susanna fell into working with people with dementia after a period of personal displacement when flow writing saved her. Living Words emerged out of the darkness of this period. All of a sudden, the journey that took her into that first hospital ward to work with people who were struggling with their own personal displacement made sense. As founder of Living Words, Susanna has led workshops and performed one-woman shows at events across the world. Susanna is an international speaker and chair of dementia and mental health conferences and events. She regularly appears and chairs at book festivals across the UK. Susanna worked one-to-one with the acclaimed poet James Berry OBE, and is very proud of the work they did together, enabling James to continue to define himself as a writer whilst living with advancing dementia. I'd like to welcome Susanna to Speak from the Body. Hi, Susanna.
Hello, thank you so much for having me, Avni. I've been looking forward to this.
Thank you. I've been waiting for a while and it's nice to have put it in the diary again. I wanted to start by asking about Living Words and how it arose, but how did you come into creating a charity?
Well, so it's about 15 years ago now. We're in sort of just into the 15th year, and I'd been through a really tough time, like so many of us go through. And what it had done is it had completely I'd become disconnected from the identity which I'd grown over the years. And so friends of mine would talk to me and they'd know who they were talking to, but I didn't know who they were talking to. I'd been through an abusive situation which left me unable to make a phone call, lots of things, and it was all quite hidden. And I was really on my knees, and so I didn't want to go on or take antidepressants as I had done in the past. I wanted to tackle it head on. That's not because obviously antidepressants, absolutely save lives in emergency situations and that people need them. I'm not against them in any way, shape or form. But for me, I didn't want to take them again. I'd been on that journey before. And I didn't want to become numb, which had happened to me. So I got a pen and paper and I just decided to just write. And flow writing, which which is sort of has quite a few different terms, where you just put the pen on the paper and you just keep writing and you just keep writing. Sometimes you can have a little anchor phrase or something like that. And so I just wrote and wrote and wrote, and it sort of wrote myself back into existence. It was sort of, I sort of always see the flow writing as a dredging. And for those who are listening who haven't given it a go, it's really a great way to get your brain out of the way. That really you can surprise yourself with what comes onto the page. And so then as I started to want to get back out in the world, I thought, right, how can I, this has really helped me. I was reading all the self-help books, Avni, that say start from where you are. And so I was like, okay, well, this is literally where I am. I don't know what the future looks like. And so I thought, well, I could do this with Imagine Futures, with groups, with people who are living with terminal illnesses or people who are maybe in refuges, escaping from abusive situations, to sort of reconnect, start to trust the sounds and the words that we make, and that there's a wisdom inside us that is going to help us, each of us, sort of show us the way, or just, we have the power to sort of comfort and soothe ourselves. And we can do that in a group. So that was the idea. And what happened was I rang around and spoke to people, and it seemed, I didn't quite know where it was going. At the same time, I started writing a play about two old women who, it was all sort of about memory and identity, and what I remember and what my identity might be from my memories is different from what yours is, but neither of them are true and neither of them are untrue. Anyway, so then I spoke to someone at St Thomas's Hospital. They had an arts and health department. They commission artists to work with all sorts of settings, and I didn't know that even existed. And at that time, they were finding it very hard, near impossible, to get artists to work with people with late stage dementia on the elderly care unit in the hospital setting. And so they said, would you try it out there? Because I had a sort of very clear intention of two people sitting together and using sound and words and pen and paper. But that's sort of all I knew. And so I said yes. And I can remember the first day at St Thomas's Hospital, going in there. Even though there'd been a couple of months set up, I arrived and no one knew that I was coming. And I sort of loved that because it gave me a freedom, and I didn't need to ask permission from anyone, because it was just like, right, I'm here, this is what I'm doing, let's get on. And I remember there was a nurse, and I said, I'm here to do this. And she said, how mad do you want them? Like that. That was the only question I got. And she was so lovely and supportive, but it really showed me straight away that difference between the sort of gallows humor, get on with it, needing to have answers, way of being that medical profession have to have, and the way, we might be able to have the privilege to see and communicate in a different way, in a different way as artists. And she also taught me something, that nurse, Sally, she taught me, someone asked her a question, she gave them an answer very clearly. I thought, wow, she knows her stuff. And then I followed her. She ran into her office, got down a book, looked it up, and she said, it's first rule of nursing, you give an answer and then you go and check it. Again, completely different to what I was coming in to do, but it was really a great experience. And so that's when I got started. And I worked with this woman. We were sitting in St Thomas's with Houses of Parliament over the way, and I worked with 3 women on that first day, and they didn't know, neither of them could state who they were, but they knew how they felt. And we could have this, and that's how I felt. And so we could have this conversation with just the words connecting, and the words and sounds which were connected to our emotions and feelings coming out and growing together, both in the air and on the page. And it started from there.
How did you know that a personal experience of flow writing would then translate into something with another person?
I didn't. I just felt that I had sort of written myself into existence. And actually, when we have a lot of preconceptions about writing and being writerly, and I think often when a person gets a pen and a piece of paper, they start to engage their brain. Okay, how do I write a sentence? How do I, look at the education system at the moment? How do I do these things? And actually, if you have someone there if you're able to just do it verbally, so you really can just let it, there's no judgment. It's like just seeing where the words go, and someone is writing them there for you. You're in a partnership. And then in the same way that when I was flow writing, I could read them back and see myself talking to myself, the person that you're engaging with can do that. So was about, and although I perhaps didn't know it at the time, about access to the arts and barriers that we face about thinking that we need to be a certain way to be creative or to creatively engage with ourselves.
And one of the things I most respect about you is how accessible you make the arts. And that wasn't my experience of growing up. Art felt like a very middle class, very educated, very aspirational thing. It didn't feel like something for the people. And I'm curious to know more of how that idea came to you.
Thank you for saying that. I think it makes me feel quite emotional hearing that. Thank you for seeing that. I think that we are the most creative thing any of us do is create our identities. We get up every day, we create a person from the clothes in our cupboard, from the way that we walk, from how we communicate. I mean, I find that astonishing. I'm someone who I'll get emotional when I lived in London, walking to the tube station, seeing everyone had woken up and decided to put their clothes on and tackle the day. I find that sort of thing so amazing that we do it. Just human beings, we're so amazing. And we have this ability to express ourselves. And things can happen in early life, or we can just grow up believing it, that it's not for the likes of us, that actually you're right, that there is this hierarchy and which is a nonsense, isn't it? because we encourage children to play, we encourage children to express ourselves, and then suddenly you're not allowed to do that anymore, or you have to, pay a lot of money and go to a course, or you have to, there's sort of been a belittling of the sort of hobbyists or over the years, and I've sort of never understood that. And I think when I grew up, I definitely bought into the sort of hierarchies. And then when I left university, I was really, privileged to get myself to an amazing university and meet wonderful people who I'm still have, lifelong friends. And yet it took me into my 30s to really recognize the difference between us all, because I didn't realize the class barriers and the differences. But what had happened is I've come out into the world and into the art world and into the theatre world, and everyone was talking a different language, and I didn't even know, because people would just see something and think I'm right for that, and they'd go for it, and I'd think, but they're not the right. But the sort of the class privilege that allows people to step into the space, those spaces of within hierarchical institutions, and it just completely confused me, because I think I absolutely bought into the belief that if you work hard, that within the education system there is a meritocracy, that the world will be the same. And then I suddenly got in the world and I was like, these aren't the same rules. What is going on? And it took me a very long time to sort of, for the penny to drop there. And that's not to take anyone's achievements away from them, absolutely not. But it definitely, for me, connects to the work that I do, and that it is everyone has the ability to communicate. And if I talk about, starting with people with late stage dementia, those people that I was working with in the first few years and ever since, and all the artists who work with us now will say the same. Their ability to creatively express themselves under, living in a world that I have no idea what it looks and feels like to them, and to be able to communicate their feelings using sounds and words in a way that is beautiful, profound, and very, very clear. When we're told the opposite, really connected me to that everyone has the ability to connect and express themselves in the purest and simplest way, if that makes sense. And now I'll just say that I just want to mention this last project got the best bit of feedback we've ever had. And it was because she put what she said, what I love. She was a carer called Karen, working in Yorkshire, West Yorkshire. And she said, when I said, Karen, can I record you reading one of your pieces from the book and tell us a bit about how you found the project? She said, well, Susanna, they made me do it. My manager made me do this course. I didn't know anything about it. And I'm sorry to say, when I looked at it and I saw the Arts Council logo, and I thought, oh no, she said, I'm sorry, I just thought this is going to be a load of nonsense and I'm not going to get it. They're going to be looking down at me, all the thing. And she said, and I'm sorry I thought that, because, and then she went on to say how she's, continuing using our methodology with different residents and in different nursing settings within the home. Anyway, but it was the best bit of feedback, because yes, that's why we do it. Yeah. I'm rambling, but I appreciate you giving me the space to ramble.
The idea of working with carers as well as people with late stage dementia, did that just evolve? Or because I think carers are often so forgotten, aren't they, in any kind of chronic illness, and that relationship is so important.
They absolutely are forgotten. And the project that we just did, we worked with, we couldn't go into care homes, so we were working remotely with carers to then work with people with late stage dementia. And then we worked individually with the carers and with relatives. And it was interesting speaking with carers and relatives who were living at home, because the carers that we spoke to, they had been through, it was like talking to people who were in a war zone, really. I can only feel that it's like that in relation to sort of processing it and not being able to tell people what's going on. But instead of, being in a war zone and then, having 2 weeks in Turkey to sort of, or Cyprus or wherever it is the troops go, to get pissed and sunbathe and get back to reality. they were, driving home from the care home to home, seeing their partner who's, is on furlough or whatever, and putting the dinner on, and there being no dividing line at all. And many of the carers throughout the whole of this pandemic, I just want to give a shout out to them, haven't seen their family and friends in order to keep the relatives of people who are in care home, keep the people. One of the carers that we worked with said very articulately that she said, I'm doing this. I haven't, my mental health is affected. I haven't seen my family for all this time. And I'm doing this so that the families can visit their relative and bring them a box of chocolates every month. Is it worth it for me? And she wasn't saying that to look down on the relatives at all, and lots of relatives see the person, that's not to be judged. But the impact that it had on her, and the fact that with the NHS clap for most of last year, it wasn't, people weren't thinking that it was for care homes as well, or at least that's how they felt. But to answer your question, how did it come? Did it come about organically? Well, the very first, when we were at St Thomas's, when I was at St Thomas's all that time ago, at the end, I knew I wanted to share what had happened, because it's so intimate and so personal. And then people have a book of their words or sounds at the end, and I wanted to, with their permission, share it. And so I just put up posters saying lunchtime in whatever room it was, turn up. And the OTs and different members of staff turned up, and I shared the words. And then the next project I did was in a care home, and very slowly started working with the staff more, until I think in my third project, right at the beginning, members of staff would come up and say, can I tell you my story? I can remember that very clearly. And a couple of people I did start, but I didn't see it as being part of like a project. And then I thought, this should happen together. So what happens now when we do a project in a care or nursing home, we'll start working with people who are living there, and then 3/4 of the way through, we'll then start working with members of staff. So members of staff also have their books of their words. So their experience is validated, and they know what it feels like for them to have the book and to go through that experience. So they know what it is for the people who are living there as well. And that's grown. And more recently, the NHS asked us in 2019, I think it was, to start working in that same way with people who are undergoing mental ill health. And we've been doing that as well. Because actually, if practice is good practice, then it doesn't matter if it is a high court judge at the top of their game, 45 years old, or or someone who has what is described as limited capacity. If it's good practice, then it can be done with anyone, and we've discovered that to be true.
What you were talking about of the people in care homes during COVID just made me wonder whether doing this work might have some aspect of dealing with the trauma of the situation, whereas for the general public who've just been enduring, lockdown after lockdown and restrictions, I often wonder, what are the ways of actually preventing this big experience from becoming trauma?
Yeah, I don't want to sort of claim anything, but to hear from people who took part in the project as the project was going on, what it was doing for them. Liz, a nurse in care, two care homes in the Wirral area, she said, I don't think you realise what you're all doing for us, and that you're healing us. And I don't know if you realise that. And there was a relative, Irene, up in Scotland. I'm smiling because of the memory of working with her. And when we had our final session together, she just looked different. And I said, Irene, you look different. She said, I know. My husband's been telling me that. She just looked lighter. I said, you just look lighter. What is it? She said, it's from doing this. She said, I just feel like it's out of me now. And it's, in that book, and it really happened, and I'm going through it. And yeah, it was amazing. But I do think that, we are an arts organisation, and we will never be an organisation that sort of twists around and then is aiming to do things like have people out of beds or make people feel better. That's not the aim. Is that we believe that the arts impact people, and then people their lives might be changed, or they might change their lives, or how they live, or how they interact, or how communication might be changed as a result of that. But the arts aren't a magic wand, because I think with social, there's a danger of, we've certainly had it quite a lot, people saying, right, we'd like you to do this, but we want this person up and walking, and we want this and this. And I'll always say no to that, because we have to start every project as walking into the unknown and not knowing. And if we're trying to and be in the process of it, and if we're focusing on outcomes, then that somehow devalues the work somehow.
Makes so much sense and echoes how I feel about conventional medicine, when it can be so reductionist and somebody's reduced just to their diagnosis, rather than that sense of wholeness about them, and their thoughts and feelings and their personal situation. All of those things build up a picture of that person.
That's so interesting. Yeah, because of the whole notion of labels, I am constantly conflicted by, and we need labels in order to, and every individual is different. Some people, a label absolutely frees them, and for other people it feels like a cage. It's so personal, isn't it?
Yeah, and we were talking about identity at the beginning of the conversation, and without a sense of identity, who are we? But then we can become restricted as well.
Yeah, and it limits our, what, there's a real overused term in dementia, which is, when you've met one person with a dementia, you've met one person with a dementia, and actually that's helpful for everything, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah. Do you do practices like flow writing for yourself as a regular? Like, is it part of your kind of toolkit?
Yes. Yeah. Books and books of it I have. Do you?
I do morning pages quite a lot these days. So Julia Cameron.
Pretty much the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, but I guess for me, because writing is something I've always had on a pedestal, it's taken me time to free up to just be able to let my hand move. And
why have you had it on a pedestal, do you think? Because you're you're a prolific reader, aren't you?
Yeah.
I know that about you.
Yeah, because books are everything to me. So yeah, and I think also I haven't grown up with this thinking of everyone has access to words or to art, or so it's always been something really precious, but not always something that I've thought was mine.
The most amazing feeling is when we're working and there is a member of, there is someone who other people would judge them as maybe even not able to write a sentence, and they have a book, and they're reading their words, and they're working with other people and sharing their words, and we're limited by, there's no limits on it, and those, suddenly the world opens up. There's someone that I worked with on a project a couple of years ago who is an incredible, like, she's just every part of her is an artist, and born in a different place, in a different background. You can absolutely see her trajectory, and it gave me absolute joy, validating how, because she had no idea how she expressed herself was so incredible, and that was wonderful to see. And then she's gone on to do lots of other different sort of creative projects from it.
I'm curious to know how you describe an artist.
I think it's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because it's a label. It's another label, isn't it? So when I started doing this work, I became a bit of a social pariah. So as being friends with lots of people, successful art world people, and suddenly I was working with people with dementia. It all just, it was like people just had no interest at all. Totally fine. And it was because of the hierarchies and it not being within a sort of something that people could sort of recognize as, oh, it's that. And so it seemed sort of, lesser. And that was fine. That was a very interesting experience. And so when I then realised I was in this arts and health world, I had been in the art world that really did, I'm ashamed to say, look down on anyone who was working in community arts, art, healthcare settings, anything like that, as sort of not being successful or something, it not being art, it not being. And so I felt and still feel to a certain extent that part of my mission was also for it to be valued. And so therefore we are Living Words artists, and we have poets, writers, musicians, and we have people who have a track record. So it is someone who has been in the RSC, been in the West End, had albums out, had poetry books out, whatever it is, they have their, and that is going. And the reason is twofold. One, that within the setting, say your dad is I think he can't communicate much, and I'm showing this, and the guy that he worked with was in Mamma Mia in the West End, and then suddenly it might change how I feel about it and how I value what's going on, what they're valuing, not that the person doesn't value their dad, but their creative expression. And so there's that. And then also within the art, what I felt was keeping the sector down, and also keeping, and as it was just beginning, and also and I'd seen it, and all people who were in TIE in the 70s and 80s, and then suddenly theatre started having education departments and sort of still didn't really take on all that work that had been done in TIE.
Being ignorant, but I don't know what TIE is.
Like theatre and education. Okay. Yeah. And so it was always like the thing you do until you get successful, and so and something that's very important to Living Words is it's not, people aren't doing this until, it's part of. So, and our artists will talk about how the work informs their practice, informs and changes the way they compose music, write, perform, and so that's why I use the term artist as I do, not as a hierarchical divide between people who are paid artists in inverted commas and those who are not, because everyone is an artist, but because of the system and the values and the society that we live in.
You've also had your arts festival, Normal. How did that come about? Because it's quite an interesting idea of bringing arts and health for the community at large.
It came about because I had this one-woman show called Crackpot that I was touting around, which was a way of sharing the words of people with the dementia and also the experience, and in a performative way. And at the same time, the Creative Foundation, as it was then, Creative Folkestone, and the venue Courthouse in Folkestone, was the person who was running it was fed up of just bringing in shows and then people coming in, seeing the show and going, and wanted to start really breaking down barriers to access for that building. And she and Allegra, who was the artistic director there, had started working with Guy Dever of Folkestone Fringe here, who was sort of plugged into the community more than she was, and had started having conversations about what if we did festivals. And at the same time, I was banging on to Allegra about, what about my show? And she went to Edinburgh, and she saw that there were quite a few shows about, right on the sort of edges and the outskirts, about mental health and about people's sort of autobiographical performances. And so she got in touch and said, I've noticed this. And we had a conversation, and I was like, yeah, it was like she'd opened the door. I remember I sent her an email. She said, what thoughts are you thinking? I sent her like bazillion ideas, and then we were like, yeah, let's do it. Let's do a festival. And then I thought, yeah, I can get Crackpot on. If I can, because also I was starting to, I came from a theatre and performance background, and I had lost, and I think a lot of people don't quite understand the journey that I've been on in terms of like absolutely picking myself up from the floor and it's only really sort of now that I have the confidence levels that I probably did pre that period, but I wanted to be pushing myself, trying to get back into that space. And so it was a wonderful place to start doing that. And it was on the Cockpit and different places, Westminster Council House, a few different places. So the festival, what we wanted to do was have not be called a arts and science or sci arts festival, not be academic, but be absolutely community focused, but with punch above its weight, have people from around the world come and talk, run workshops, have performances. And as well as having people come in and do things, we built up what the festival was through think-ins, which and using open space technology. It completely comes from I'm just thinking I probably shouldn't go all into it, but anyway, Improbable Theatre use it a lot, and it came from the idea of a man whose name has come out of my head. That a lot of conferences and things he'd go to and realize that actually all the interesting ideas were happening in the coffee breaks. And so it was like, how can you have a setting in which you're enabling those sort of coffee break situations? So within an open space, it means that you can just go and listen and walk away like you would at a coffee break. And so we started, and I think we had 5 people come from the community at the first think-in. And it was like, what are we going to do? We want to do this. And by the time we got to sort of year 4, we didn't have space really for everyone who was coming for the meetings. And there'd be places that people could come and say something they might want to do, something they might want to see, or something they were interested in. It could be really specific, could be a general idea. And then I'd always have an idea of sort of, I'm quite good at seeing the trends coming. I'd be like, I think we want to look at this and this and this, but what might we look at within that? And we called it Normal Festival of the Brain by accident, because we were sending ideas back and forth to each other on email, and I said to Allegra, what about Normal ? And she said, oh, I really like it, Normal ? And then it was like, yeah, Normal ? Because it's like no one's normal. There's no such thing. So that's how it came into being.
Does having a festival that's trying not to be academic, does it feel like it makes it more available? Because when I think of things to do with the body, there's always this, it's for the clever people, they've studied anatomy, they've studied endocrinology, they're the ones who have that information, whereas we all have bodies, and it's something that I really believe in, the democracy of understanding how we work.
Yeah, I mean, we've had things at the festival like, one of the top, neuro people, Selena Ray, who's doing incredible research into dementias, and she came and worked with an artist and did a thing called neuronal disco. So it was kind of like a sort of, you'd be skipping round, and she had this big helmet on, and you'd do a dance to some pop music, and different color lights would come on, and you'd be a particular brain thing or something. And you came out, exhausted, happy, and knowing a bit more about the brain, but with someone who is formidable, and you might be a bit nervous to go and see just talking. So that it's not in any way a dumbing down, but an opening up. And for people who we'd have, when we had the festivals in real life, as it were, we'd always say to the artists or scientists or whoever they were, that if you're coming, we'd love you to stay over the weekend. We'll give you somewhere to stay. People would open up their homes if, when we run out of budget. And it's a lovely place to come. And everyone would be chatting. That would be one of the wonderful things. You'd go into the bar area where we, have different available food options for everyone's budgets. And also, so we'd have sort of some free food and things now and again to also try and level things out. And there'd be, a complete mix of people chatting. And that for me is what success looks like there. And at the community think-ins, sitting with one of the top GPs in the area next to someone who had their Porsche outside, next to someone who lived on the streets, and everyone treating everyone the same way, because it cuts through, doesn't it?
As you're saying that, I'm just thinking about when you described going to St Thomas's Hospital and first working with people with late stage dementia, and just I don't know what that must take to be in a new situation, and just, that's something I know of you, of how easy it is for you to have rapport with people. You just do that very naturally. But that's, to create a whole festival around that way of connecting is really impressive.
I think it comes back also to that sort of the class things that we sort of looked at briefly, and being given permission, and being and the, breaking down the barriers. And also, I'm very much one of like, I'm happy for people to think I'm a dick, if it means that then that means they're in the space and they're connecting with other people. It's it's consciously done, and I absolutely try and walk the talk of what my belief system is, and it can be really hard sometimes, especially in the world that we live in. I think this is such a wonderful way to engage with someone, and you're getting sort of almost like my just absolute subconscious ramblings.
Oh, I love it.
Which I appreciate very much. But yeah, absolutely. And I think people did used to say to me, and I think I'm really lucky that because of my background and then the education that I had, that I talk to everyone the same, and I don't think someone is better because they're. I don't see one person as being. I don't see a chief executive as being more important than the person who helps you park a car, or like why. I fundamentally don't understand why anyone would, and I think that's. I think that helps.
And where do you see your work going in the future? This part of your work. I mean, you're such a creative person, and there's so many different things that you do.
Well, what we, Living Words has been really responsive and really grassroots and agile, and we're trying to keep that and also, grow and change. But it's taken an awful lot out of me to get this far, and I'm really aware that I can't carry on at the pace anymore that I have been working at. And we have a team of about 7 Living Words artists, and it's been quite a slow process training everyone up, and we're looking at how to change that. So the ambition at the moment is to get in a general manager in the next few months, to get funding for that, because the funding also doesn't represent sort of how much we do, because it's often me doing the applications, and so we sort of focus on the projects and not on the sort of the growth. So getting in someone who can focus on the growth will be amazing. And our ambition, when COVID struck, we were 3 months into a 3-year plan. I've never had a 3-year plan before. and so that was thrown out the window, and we responded to all the different people that we work with, and had different sort of workshops online in the park, and the project we did in the autumn came out of it, and we discovered that we can do action learning. We can work on Zoom. We can, rather than being local or working in different areas, we can work across the whole country. So with that project, we had like 17 care homes across, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and that was a real turning point. So we're looking from later on in the autumn and into next year, doing trainings both for care staff, and also we're looking at how we can do artist trainings. We have an international reach, so we have partners in New York, we have Living Words in Taiwan, and it's called Living Whispers in Taiwan because there's no word for words. Amazing. And so someone from the British Council paid for me to go over, and that was wonderful. And then in Hungary, there's just been stuff translated, but all of this is just sort of coincidental. And so looking at how to actually do that training, and I've no doubt that it will be a lot easier than I've been scared of over the years. So really working on that legacy, and just having many more people trained up in the work. When I put a thing on Facebook saying, that our plan is to look at that, and there was a message from someone who I don't know who they are, and they were in Canada, and they were like, "Oh my goodness, I've been following you for years. I've been waiting for you to say this." And it was like, wow. we never know our impact, do we? So that's something exciting to look forward to. So there's that. And then also it means that I've always called myself artistic director, even though I haven't had someone else being the executive director, because that's been the vision. And so having a general manager executive will mean that I can move into that, just focusing more on sort of the artistic development and delivery. And our ambition is to, if anyone is out there listening, we really, really want a lovely camper van, really big one that we can turn into a touring venue that can do workshops. Our plan is to go to all the places that we went to with the book over the next year or so, and connect the areas to the local art centres, and to really, so the carers can really, and relatives can really have that 360 experience, and bringing the words out from the care home. And we'll put on our some theatre performances that we're building up as well. So there you go, that's the short term.
And you mentioned about how it's not going to be sustainable to carry on working the way that you've been working. And I just wonder your thoughts of, I see creativity as part of someone's life force or their expression, so it's part of their health. Do you have any thoughts of, in an ideal world, how that can best be taken care of?
Well, I think for me, we've always been right at the beginning. Philip Cowell, who's one of our associate artists, has been with me from the beginning. He's always said, we drew up this idea that, you could have months away to work on. Someone would be working in their own, art field, and then doing some projects, and even as the, managing director or whatever. But what that means on a sort of tool, what are the tools for me in supporting my creativity? It had got out of whack by the end of last year, and particularly in relation, as a friend, all the sort of personal, familial, emotional health issues that we'd had going on. So everything had got out of whack. And so now I do flow writing. I've got a group on a Monday night that we meet up on Zoom, and they're different. There's a painter, a performer, and someone who's working on a novel, and we share, just share. So we have that commitment. So it's about that commitment to myself. And then I'm dancing on my own. I'm dancing on my own, and really trying to, although Living Words and everything we do is about, words and sounds, it's totally embodied. And I think I've been, my poor body and my reaction to stress is that all of my family, we just sort of, we're like oxes. Any stress, we just, the pounds come on, and we're like, we're like, yeah, sort of building a wall of protection, and that can take its toll as well. And so for me, it's about moving more. And I have also made sure that I've had some support in place. And I think if anyone is listening who is interested in working in any way creatively in healthcare settings, or with other people in any setting, it can be in any, we run workshops in cafes while people are having their dinner. I would say that you must have supervision in place for yourself. Ideally, it will be paid supervision that you will have. At the very least, you must have some sort of peer-to-peer supervision with someone that you really, really trust, because otherwise it's going back to the ox thing. You're just carrying it, and it comes on in those onion layers, and you don't realize how much you're carrying. And certainly in the early years of Living Words, I did that. And the other thing that I would say, and I only realised when I went to see a show about in a hospital with older people, and I sat there, and as soon as the lights came on, I was like, oh God, I'm really carrying this. No shit, Sherlock. And the other thing I would say is about boundaries. And if you're going to do some work with someone or people, you've got to be really boundaried about it. When we're training the artists, and in the first couple of projects that they'll have, I'll say towards the end, okay, who's been out and about and seen something and thought, I'm going to get that for that person that I'm working with, and then and people will always say, I picked up a book and I wanted to give it to them, or I'm thinking about when the project ends, when I'm coming back to visit them. And I said, okay, so if you do that and then you carry on doing this work, are you saying that you don't trust that the work is enough and that the relatives and the carers we haven't embedded it enough, so the carers and relatives aren't going to be supporting that person when we leave, because we aim to sort of be invisible by the time we leave, that the book's there as evidence and communication carries on. And are you saying that you're going to carry on doing this work, and then say you pick up 1 or 2 people every residency, so at the end of a couple of years you spend all your free time going visiting all these people? That's not possible, and then you're starting to sort of martyr yourself. But it's something that might sound harsh for people who are starting to go into that, but it's something that I made those mistakes early on. I remember one Christmas going around different care homes dropping things off, and I thought, I think I've got things blurred here. So really work out those boundaries.
Thank you for talking about that, because I think boundaries for anyone in a helping or caring capacity don't get talked about enough, or they get talked about in a sense of have strong boundaries without really having the practical implications of what that looks like. And I see it all the time, just mirrored around with colleagues and, just people wanting to endlessly give and not realizing how much you have to also nourish yourself in the first place.
Yeah, it's so hard to strike that balance. Especially, I think, when people start first off. I don't know what it's like for you with arts and health. People can suddenly go, "Oh my God, look at the impact this is having," and then just sort of do more and more. And it can be a bit of a, dare I say it, saviour complex. Is that the same in your field?
Yeah, I think there can be a certain ego attachment to the giving and this. Someone getting better and everything. So then the natural thing is to want to do more of it. But you have to keep some reserve too. Thank you so much for talking to me. I love hearing about the work that you've been doing. And I hadn't realised, even though I've known you, that it's been going on for as long as it has. So yeah, thank you for all the work you're doing. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please send me a comment on Twitter or Instagram @AvneyTouch. Subscribe to Speak from the Body on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Go to avney-touch.com/podcast to get the show notes. And finally, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.